If you're constantly playing in all the super high rollers, you have a ton of history with the other players in there, and things get weird and you have to take weird lines sometimes. I assume. I haven't been doing that. But I think that's what's going on with Dan Smith and Bryn Kenney here. It was just 3 left in the Jeju super high roller.
Yeah, this is like a really pricey tournament, to be clear.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of money on the line, and these guys are really among the very, very best players in the world. So this is pretty sweet. Pretty awesome stuff. And you know who suggested it?
Leo Chen, of course.
That's right, Leo Chen, and he did it on Twitter. And if you have a suggestion for the breakdown, you tweet it at us, you include a YouTube link and a timestamp so we know where it is on the video, and then we can break it down.
You know what else you should know where it is? That would be Nitrogen Sports Poker Room.
Yeah,
It's on the internet. So Nitrogen Sports Poker Room is a wonderful place of joyous unicorns.
Basically.
But what I mean by that is that we have exclusive Poker Guys events there that you can only get access to using the link that we tweet out every once in a while about Nitrogen Sports Poker Room. Because you know what? They give you some sweet tournament deals.
Yeah, at the end of every month we have our special Poker Guys only tournament, and that isn't just us, that includes all of you who sign up with our link.
You don't just watch us play
Poker Guys invite only tournament, whatever you want to call it. But there's 1,000 buy-ins guaranteed. We usually get like 80 players, which means there's a massive overlay every single time. It's also super cheap to play. You got to get in there and get you some poker.
Get the poker, also the sports betting and all the casino games, you know, have some fun.
Nice. 175.
And again, one of those spots where Bryn can really consider what to do here. Of course, he has to take into consideration that Dan is just not going to mess around so much.
15 seconds. Five, 6 months.
520.
There you go. At this point, it doesn't even matter anymore to Bryn what hand he has. But Smith is aware of this. We'll see, but Smith has a good hand to do some pushing back now. The fact that he blocks a lot of really strong ace-high hands that Bryn could have is an extra advantage. And that's why I said earlier, it's important to have an ace in your hand when you make a move against the chip leader.
13 seconds.
He's 35 big blinds behind.
5 seconds.
He's going to make the call. He's going to see a flop.
We're going to stop it already because I think a lot of you probably have opinions on how these guys have played pre-flop already, which is reasonable because there's interesting stuff going on. Bryn deciding to make this large 3-bet with Jack-4 off is just big stack bully. What are you going to do, basically, is what it seems like to me. Very interesting to me is Dan's position here because I think it's significantly weird and hard to figure out exactly what's right to do with ace-10 of spades starting with about 38 blinds.
I mean, we had a big disagreement about it, not an angry one, but a disagreement for sure on our podcast. I was saying, I think he's probably supposed to just move in and hope it all works out. Grant made a really good point, which is he's probably folding out ace-9 and getting called by ace-jack because Bryn's got enough chips to do it. This is a really good point, and you do have to have some hands in your calling range. But the problem with calling, I think, is that it sets up some really weird stuff situationally down the road if we're not going to just fold on missed flops.
Right. I mean, and you can't against Bryn Kenney just fold on missed flops. So this puts you in a problematic thought process down the line. But in the moment, like Jonathan was pointing out pre-flop, you might be getting called by all better hands and folding out all worse hands if you're Dan Smith and you shove, which is not good.
You do get you are going to be in a lot of coin flip situations if you get called.
You get some of that.
That's good. But you know, you're going to fold out some coin flip situations too, which is like king queen and maybe some baby pairs.
Yeah, that's possible.
But that's it.
But that's about it. And so now Dan Smith is putting himself in this position against this very aggressive player where he's deciding, okay, I don't want to take the game theory disaster pre-flop and just pick up the chips.
Right.
What I want to do is play my range against his range, knowing that he's kind of a maniac with the chip lead.
Right.
And I have to play accordingly, and it's going to kind of suck.
Yeah, which is fair. That's a fair way to do it. You're Dan Smith, you do have position. He gets to use the value of position and what he believes is a stronger range right now. That's not crazy at all.
That's no help to either player. Bryn has to suspect that Smith has a reasonable hand here. The board is so dry. Let's see if he goes for it.
15 seconds. Five seconds.
385.
385.
Puts out 385. And this is a disaster for Dan Smith. He misses, and now he's gonna have to go into the margins if he wants to continue here.
Seconds.
He's gonna make the call. Great call here by Dan Smith. Well, and there you go. That shows that if you're gonna flat call here instead of go all in, then you need to have this in your arsenal. Bryn Kenney gets there. But does he think it's good? Now, that's a disastrous turn for Dan Smith, because I suspect that if Bryn starts checking, that Dan is actually thinking that his ace high is going to be good quite often.
15 seconds. Five seconds. Check.
He's going to make the check. I think it's a combination of thinking he's going to win at showdown enough of the time, and Dan actually slow playing something really strong. And we'll get to see how Dan Smith feels about his hand. If he bets, he thinks it's the best to push out all of Bryn's hands. If he checks, he'll just feel that he wins the showdown enough at a time. Checks for now. Now that's a rough turn for Dan Smith. He was sniffing this out very well. King is going to make an extremely hard card to do anything on for him.
15 seconds. Five seconds.
485.
45.
485.
495.
Sorry, what's the bet? 485.
This is a very small bet. Quarter the size of the pots. So hard for me to assess if Bryn is turning his hand into a bluffer or if he's trying to get value from the exact hand that Dan has.
15 seconds.
And this would be a surreal value bet.
Five seconds.
Trying to go through the hands. You always have to retell the story in your head. Does it make sense? Super confusing bet by Bryn, knowing his cards. Honestly, don't know if he's betting for value or. It's quite an incredible read to put your opponent on ace high and think that he'll call you enough of the time. Because it's never 100%, of course. You can never say, oh, I knew for sure he had ace high. He's going to get the call. Wow.
So we can see the pitfalls of playing any one way against Bryn Kenney preflop here. We know what the ultimate pitfalls were if Dan were to shove. It might have been a bit of a game theory disaster. But now he's in this spot where Bryn Kenney gets to value bet his pants off with Jack 4, and Dan kind of has to let him some of the time. Now he could decide to fold this river, but he decided, okay, ace-10 of spades is way ahead of Bryn Kenney's range in general. His range is obviously infinite, includes every 2-card combination in the deck. I guess ace-10 is good enough as a distribution versus the entire deck that I'm supposed to call down here? Maybe that's what he's thinking?
I mean, probably that's what he's thinking. I understand that. But I gotta come back to what we were saying before, which is situationally, this is a frickin' disaster, right? Dan even calling on the flop, which I understand why he does, because range versus range, if you thought you were ahead pre-flop and you were trying to keep Bryn in and really maximize the value of ace-10, you're still usually ahead on the flop.
Got 2 back doors also.
Yeah, it's very, and you're in position, it's completely, you're getting a cheap price to call, but look at the stack to pot ratio that's set up by calling. Dan's got 1.3 million chips left in his stack. The pot's already got 1.9 million in it going to the turn. That is hugely problematic for a hand that has no hand. It's just ace high, which I know can be good sometimes, but Bryn's range being infinite means it's also not going to be good a fair amount of the time.
Right, but it's good more often than it's not.
Of course.
Obviously.
I mean, it probably is.
Yeah, but then there's the turn card, which is such a weird thing when Bryn hits the 4, because you would expect that the majority of the time, unless Bryn is the type of guy who's going to give up a lot, which doesn't seem like the type of guy who's going to give up a lot, he's going to be moving in or making some sort of significant bet on the turn. It just so happens it's a 4. I think any jack, any 4 are maybe the only 2 cards he might decide to check, maybe if the 9 pairs. But Dan shouldn't have too many 9s in his range as played pre-flop. So it's weird that it goes check, and Dan should be a little bit worried that Bryn's checking here, right?
I mean, it's hard to know. Like, sometimes Bryn might be giving up. Bryn can't move in 100% of the time. Taking this line against Dan, Dan's going to eat him alive.
Yeah,
if
that's
Dan
true.
knows he's always moving in with nothing.
Dan
right?
should have some pocket aces, pocket kings in his range here if he's going to have ace-10
Yeah, Dan's going to have some insta calls for sure if Bryn moves in. This might even be an insta call, by the way, if Bryn moves in. I'm not sure. But I think Bryn's got to give up some of the time, otherwise Dan's going to find it too easy to play against him, and Bryn is clearly not easy to play against. So because of that, I think it's sometimes Bryn is giving up, sometimes Bryn's got a medium showdownable hand.
Yeah, he does, and somehow figures out that that's the best hand, by the way, on the river, which maybe is the coolest part of this hand, that Bryn is like, well, my 4 is good enough of the time that I can value bet here to get called by specifically ace high. That has to be what he's targeting, right? Maybe, I can't think, is a deuce on the board? I don't think so. Pocket deuces,
I mean, okay, yeah, I mean, it's really hard to imagine Bryn is bluffing here, right? And I don't think he's merging either. I think he's absolutely going for value from ace high. It's optimistic to think he's going to get it, honestly, but he does get it, and it's because Dan is sort of in this super weird spot where it's like, well, if Bryn was giving up on the turn, Dan checks to give Bryn a chance to bluff the river, right? Yeah. Otherwise, he would just move in and try and take the pot down most of the time because that pot is significant to him. But he's trying to get even more. He's trying to really maximize the value of this ace-10. But now the problem is Bryn isn't bluffing. Bryn's getting super thin and excellent value.
And yeah, it really works out well for Bryn. Now, it's quite possible that Dan Smith is printing money with this line. It's possible that no 4 comes on the turn, Dan Smith wins this hand, and this line actually makes money over time. It just got pretty unlucky that the 4 came on the turn and that Bryn hit a part of the board, which the majority of the time, if he's playing the entire deck, he is not going to hit a part of the board. So maybe this is the right move by Dan. It just didn't work out this time.
Maybe. It's possible it is, but I keep coming back to this is going to work so much better for players if they are much deeper than Dan is to start the hand effectively, right, in terms of blinds. Because by calling here and being wrong, Dan has crippled himself. He's got almost nothing left, and of course he does end up finishing 3rd in this tournament because of this hand, pretty much.
Certainly.
And it just didn't have to go this way. Like, he could have won a pre-flop, and I understand this is like hindsight is 20/20, but he could have won a pre-flop. And he could have given up at some point post-flop and saved some of these chips and given himself a much better chance to win the tournament.
I like the way Dan played the hand, personally.
This is one of those rarer hands where Grant and I really don't see eye to eye so much. Grant really likes Dan Smith's line. I'm really concerned about Dan Smith's line. I understand his thoughts for sure. I don't think he's even necessarily wrong, Grant or Dan Smith. And yet, I think situationally it's really problematic. Where do you guys stand on all this? Do you agree more with Grant that you just have to play this way against Bryn Kenney, otherwise he's going to ultimately just eat your lunch? Or do you think that you agree more with me that situationally you can't put yourself in this position when you're this short and shallow against these players in this situation when you're 3-handed in such a big spot?
Yeah, I
So-
think you could go either way, and it's fair to say either thing.
Yeah, I'm really curious. So let us know in the comments about that, or really any of the other decisions the players made that you like or don't like. We'd love to see what you have to say.
Now, if you thought this was a bit of a complicated hand, you're right. And we did our best to just take a high-level bird's-eye view of it for this video. But on our podcast, where we get really deep into everything, we really get into every decision,
Yeah.
like a guy cleaning grout out of the corner of his shower. You know, we
With
get
a
real
toothbrush.
We get real serious about it, and that's where you should go if you want the real in-depth Poker Guys stuff. The podcast, it's usually 45 minutes to an hour. The breakdown presented by the Poker Guys. Check it out.
Yeah, another thing you could check out is elite players playing elitely.
Yeah.
And we have done so many breakdowns of the best players in the world making outrageous, incredible plays that blow our minds. And lucky for you, we put together a playlist and it's right here. So if you want to see more great breakdowns of amazing plays, just click that.
And if you like this video, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel.